Those who have been in a coma, what was it like? I was in a very short coma, 6 days, after a brain hemorrhage. I recall nothing during the coma. I have a fuzzy understanding of my first week or two after waking up, having pieced it together by the stories I was told. And memories of the day, or days, leading up to it were temporarily wiped out, though they have since returned. This was over a decade ago, so take this with a grain of salt. My memory in general is imperfect at best. My mom had the same thing. Unfortunately, hers was so severe and she died 5 days into her coma. I'm kind of glad that you don't remember your coma because I like to think her last moments were having fun with her family, not being scared knowing she was gonna die. Reposting from another thread I talked about it. 2 weeks induced because of swine flu. During this time, Oprah announced she was ending the Oprah Winfrey Show. I was very upset to learn this after the fact. Mostly because the TV running in my room plus the drugs they gave me to keep me under, gave the most cinematic dreams I've ever experienced. Somehow the news of Oprah retiring filtered into my brain as dreaming about saving the whales with her in a submerged Chicago. We had champagne brunch. It was excellent. I was also a superhero who could fly and fought my enemies on the rims of volcanoes. And then, I woke up and not only could I not fly, but my buddy Oprah had betrayed me into retirement. I was crushed. This is so interesting to read everyone's experience. I'm an ICU nurse, and I work with patients in comas all the time. I talk to them, I let them know why I'm touching them, whether it be to give them medication, draw lab work, bathe them, clean them after an incontinent episode. I'll also reorient them to where, why, and how they're in that situation. I'll also tell them when their loved ones call to check on them. I would feel awful knowing someone I took care of had flashbacks of feeling violated during a coma. Same here. Work critical care dialysis, and I always talk to my patients, telling them what I'm doing, how it's going to feel, offer reassurance, and sometimes, unluckily for them, I hum or sing a song. I like to assume they can hear at least a little of what I'm telling them. I assume a coma is a scary place, and if I can offer even 5% comfort to them, then so be it. Not me, but my dad has described his coma after his car accident. He was pulled up a little too far at a stop sign, and a guy who was speeding and on his phone swerved off the road. So he was in a coma for about 2 months. On my end, it wasn't like the movies. He didn't just wake up miraculously. It was 2 months of steady improvements. One eye opened, then a few days later his other eye was half open, then he could wiggle a toe, then he could move his fingers, etc. On his end, he said he could hear bits and pieces of what was happening around him, but it was like a dream that he couldn't wake up from. When me and my 2 younger siblings would come in and talk to him, his heart rate would go down. When a football game was on and his friends came to sit with him and watch it, the nurses made them turn it off once his team started losing because his heart rate blew up. I know this will get buried but I'll post my experience anyway. I went to the hospital with renal failure and a pulse ox reading of 32. I remember the nurse saying my pee looked like root beer, and when she stabbed my arm to give me an IV all she said was, "Uh-oh." My arm got really warm and my dad moved my head so I wouldn't see how much blood was coming out. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital bed, tearing through the desert at 60+ miles per hour. Nothing but me and a hospital bed. No motor, nothing. Just cruising through the desert. I'd see all sorts of weird things, most specifically was Ronald McDonald. I saw him all the time. Then my hospital bed would come to a screeching halt, and I'd be in the living room of someone I knew. Grandma, good friends, former coaches. Basically any living room I had spent time in with someone I cared about. The weird thing was the living rooms were always 3-walled. One wall was missing, and beyond that wall was a barren desert. We would talk for a while about God knows what, then I'd be pulled back into the desert cruising at 60 miles per hour again. It happened over and over again. Sometimes the same living rooms would reappear, but almost all of them were unique. When I came out of the coma, everyone kept commenting how good my hair looked. I couldn't figure out why they kept saying that, so I finally asked my mom how long I had been asleep. She said 13 days. And I had cards and flowers from all these people whose living rooms I'd been visiting in my coma. It was surreal, and I definitely can't explain it. Especially since most of the cards came from people who weren't allowed to visit me in intensive care and were sending well wishes in writing, not in person. There was a kid named Martin Pistorius who fell into a coma for 12 years but his mind woke up 2 years into it. However, he was unable to speak or move, and everyone believed he was a vegetable at best. This wasn't the case, his mind was fully there. For over a decade, he was mistreated in facilities that played Barney repeats every single day for years without him being able to look away. True mental torture. He was also physically and sexually abused on top of that. At one point, he couldn't stop throwing up, so the nurse's tube fed him his own vomit. His parents were unaware of all this and tried adapting the best they could. In some of the lowest moments, he remembers his mother telling him she wishes he would just die, yet all he could feel was compassion for how she felt. Eventually, someone who cared enough realized he was responsive enough and got him the help he needed. And now he has a wife and kids, talks like Stephen Hawking, and is a computer programmer. Really shows how you can still emerge from the deepest, darkest places of life. If anyone is wondering, it happened to him due to cryptococcal meningitis. Fungus covered his brain and spinal cord. The disease comes from soil with infected bird droppings being inhaled. One day he was just an innocent 12-year-old playing outside, only for his life to be changed because of simply breathing in some kicked-up dirt. Glad he came out on top in the end. I had a motorcycle wreck a few years ago. Someone texting blew a stop sign and 8 ended up T-boning them. Not sure if coma is the correct term, but I was definitely unconscious for 2 days. Honestly, just felt like the worst, least refreshing nap in the history of naps. Had the wreck on a Sunday, woke up sometime Tuesday afternoon or evening and asked if the bike was okay. It wasn't. I'd love a bike one day, but stories like this always scare me off them. My dad used to live in Vietnam and ride with him mates, and the amount of horror stories has scared the shit out of me. When I was in 5th grade, I fell out of a tree and bonked my head pretty well. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. For me, the experience is easily summarized in 3 parts. When I fell, I blacked out before I hit the ground. Or at least that is where memory fades. And fades is really the best word. It was as if my consciousness was drained away and then blackness and nothingness. It was as if my body knew how badly it was going to hurt and so it shut down. I have very vague memories while in the coma of hearing my dad reading a book, or my mom telling me that she knew I would pull through, or of a tube in my nose. But these were always super fuzzy moments and I never was conscious during them. It was more like a half second of being aware of one particular thing, the way the tube felt being taped against my arm, and wishing I could reach out and move it and then back into the nothingness. I think that I was somewhat aware of the fact that I was a little more aware each time that this happened, but honestly I am not certain of even that much. Waking up was sudden. So sudden. I was in blackness. Had a moment of awareness, like my neck hurts, and then the pain was magnitudes higher. No longer a distant perception but something that I was actively conscious of. Waking up was the most painful moment of my life and I just started crying and then couldn't even cry, it hurt so bad. I think that had more to do with injuries sustained to my neck and head than the coma, but that is what it was like. After an hour my body was used to the pain and I was totally normal, albeit very weak, hungry, and thirsty. I survived and am fine now without any lasting issues. I had meningitis when I was 12, which got misdiagnosed for stomach flu and ended up with me being taken to the hospital last minute. The last memory I had was falling asleep watching the emergency news on the Brussels airport attack. I later on had a sort of fever dream, which ended up to be true, about my parents driving me to the ER saying it's okay over and over again. I couldn't move or talk, so it seemed more like a dream than something that was actually happening. I saw the lights of the ER parking lot, which made me close my eyes, and after that it was like taking a nap. I had no awareness of time at all. It's like going to sleep and just waking up what feels like a second later, but it's actually morning already. I woke up 6 days later, highly drugged, but only gained consciousness the day after. My first memory after waking up is opening my laptop in the hospital bed to play Minecraft. I have no idea what happened or what I said when I woke up before that. Wakes up from a coma, shrugs and starts up Minecraft. My wife was in a diabetic coma for 2 weeks when she was in elementary school. She knew her sugar was low, then all of a sudden she woke up in the hospital with absolutely no idea that any time had passed. I was in medically induced coma for about a week. The coma itself is not much to talk about. There is just a gap in your memory, even from before it happened. I don't even remember the accident that brought me there in the first place. Waking up from it is much different story though. Since I was fully dosed by painkillers and sedatives and whatnot, I was basically high as kite, and since the trauma I suffered was very serious, my brain constructed very stressful, vivid nightmares I remember to this day. I was in coma because I fell 15 meters and broke nearly all of the bones in my back, and it was horrible. When I woke up I thought the nurses were torturing me and that I need to escape. I started hallucinating a lot and couldn't even understand that I am in hospital. The biggest problem were my dreams. I thought I was a time traveler or some kind of god. I thought I was shot by the police and other crap. I still have flashbacks to this day and it is no fun. But I am getting therapy to deal with it. And I could watch porn in my dreams, so yeah. It was confusing and horrible at the same time. 0/10, would not do again. My wife was in a coma for about a month. At first I didn't bring the kids up because of how she looked, but in the third week her color was closer to normal and there was less stuff going on as she was pretty stable compared to the first 2 weeks. Anywho, I had told the kids that while mom wasn't responsive there was a chance could she hear us, so they should be as brave as they can and sound as happy as they can. I described to them everything I thought that might spook them, from the tubes and wires to things beeping randomly and doctors and nurses coming and going. They were awesome. Even in the initial shock at seeing her with a ventilator they were vocally loving, hugged and patted, held her hand etc. We sat in the room a while and just talked. At one point I asked the kids what their favorite vacation was. Instead of our Disney and Universal Studios trips they both agreed it was the road trip we took from Vegas down to Arizona, driving all over and seeing all the incredible sights. We talked about rides and amusements in Vegas, then Hoover Dam, the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, cave dwellings, petrified forest, silly road stops, a cheap motel we stayed in Flagstaff. We laughed and cried, just a little. It was as nice as it could be. They kissed her goodbye saying see you soon. My wife heard it all, but in a hallucinatory way. She now has, to this day, near 10 years later, a vivid memory of a second Arizona vacation she went on with us. She even asked me early on after she woke up if we had gone on a vacation recently. Her mind went through every detail we talked about and even added on to it as if it all actually happened, and the memories of it are as real as any. Not me, but my dad. He was in a coma for about a week after riding his bike head first into a telephone pole. He says that he remembers the accident itself, followed by an out-of-body experience. He remembers flying high above the scene of the accident and looking down at his body laying there lifeless. He remembers seeing a woman from the neighborhood rushing over to see what happened, and other neighbors brought out a flat beach chair to put him on while waiting for the ambulance. After he woke up from the coma and immediately broke down crying as the influx of stimulation and confusion poured in. His brain was stuck about 5 or 6 years in the past. He remembered his phone number, address, etc. but from years ago, and he couldn't remember the current info. It took about 2 weeks after coming to for his brain to catch back up to current day. The spookiest part? He went to the house of the woman who he had seen first from above and asked if she had been the first to get there and other info about what he saw from outside his body, and she confirmed all of it. Pretty wild. I can only compare it to when you're little and wake up at a friend's house and don't know where you are. I was in a coma for 2 months after a bad car accident. It wasn't medically induced, it was thanks to brain damage. When I woke up I was alone in the hospital room and had no clue what happened or why I was there. I had a neck brace on due to a broken neck, so I figured something was wrong with my neck but was unsure how or what happened. For some reason I thought I was 60 years old. I was in my 20s. I was paranoid and scared, but didn't know why I was there. I used context clues to figure out I was in the hospital. It was frightening. After about 5 minutes I decided to go back to sleep. 2 months of sleep wasn't quite long enough. A kid I went to middle school with spent 5 months in a medically induced coma waiting for a new heart. He said that in dream time it was equivalent to several years during which he could fly and was stronger, but also had to fight clowns with chainsaws. He was aware that he was in a coma but couldn't really do anything about it, obviously. Interestingly enough, there was a point in this dream where he was tasked with doing something that was literally impossible and he was somehow able to do it. In the real world, I believe medical professionals at one point said it was literally impossible for him to recover. I'm not sure what health complications were happening during this time, or if this was pre or post-transplant. I was in a coma for 3 days following a serious cycling accident, medically induced. I woke up with zero recollection of why I was there or what was said while I was out. It is easily the scariest situation I've found myself in, but I can't say I remember it. I woke up to my mom and dad in the hospital with me and my body in traction of some sort, and that was way scarier to me. In 2016 I was in a coma from March 31st to May 5th, then half awake for another month after that. It was like the longest, scariest dream of my life. I was medically induced by a fentanyl drip for about a week at first, and let me tell you, fentanyl is a demon. Wacky dreams about fighting corrupt hospital officials, so my brain knew where I was. They didn't think I'd ever talk or walk again. But in the hospital bed I laughed at an episode of that 70s show and inclined every day after. Putting me at about 85% health overall these days. But pretty much an average guy. Oh, it was a head injury, had a seizure in the bathroom that made me fall onto the sink. Not my story, but on a previous post asking this question there was a guy who talked about having a whole second life while in his coma. He talked about vivid memories of his family and friends. He met a woman and they had kids together. Then one day he was sitting in his lounge and started staring at this lamp. There was something off about it but he couldn't tell what. He stared at it. And kept staring all throughout the night. Then he realized the lamp wasn't real. Suddenly he started recalling his real life and woke up from his coma. He said that to this day he still grieves the loss of his family from the coma. I believe he said he sometimes sees his coma children in his dreams. It was really interesting and depressing. If anyone can find that comment, let me know. I wasn't in one for a long, just under a week. While I was in the coma, I didn't remember a thing. When I came out of it, I just remember hearing my mom yell to the attending "he's up." Then I woke up with a bunch of white coats in the room. I was super stiff and incredibly confused. Oddly enough, I kept having vivid dreams of myself in the coma after the fact. Still have them to this day. They're almost like an out-of-body experience because I can see myself laying in the bed with people around me. Was hit by a car when I was 5 years old. Ended up with toxic shock syndrome and went into a coma for 4 months. I just remember some very weird dreams, which I can still recall vividly 26 years later. Someone mentioned something about visiting another realm, and that's pretty close to the mark. I work as an RN in the ICU, mostly medical these days, but I also work in trauma, surgical, neuro and occasionally cardiac, and most of my patients, especially now with COVID, are under deep IV sedation. We use everything from IV opiates to benzos, sometimes ketamine or dexmedetomidine. The ones that always seem to be kinda there are the ones on ketamine. I can't imagine the confusion of having someone touching you, cleaning you, the bright lights, all while in a K-hole. ICU delirium is a real problem and there are many people that come out of their experience with intense PTSD. Whenever I do anything to slash for a sedated patient, I always try to remember to tell them where they are, what day/time it is, and why they're in the hospital. Even if I just told them a half hour ago. I don't know if it helps, but it's what I would want for myself for sure. Wear a mask please, unless you are okay with the possibility of having a machine breathing for you in a weird dreamlike waking nightmare where you have a tube in your urethra and your butt and someone has to come poke your wrist artery multiple times a day. We try to make it as comfortable and traumatic as possible, but shit, dude. The ICU is a horrifying place. 10 days I don't remember anything about. Not sure if it is a blessing or a curse. Hit by a drunk driver. My wife and I lived, our daughter didn't. To me that stuff on TV where the PT wakes up and everything goes back to normal is bullshit. When I woke up I was in a conversation with another PT. Air Force had sick bays, not individual rooms. I can only compare it to a computer. I had been hung in an update and then, flicker, new screen. I had woken up several days earlier, but nothing stayed with me. My wife says I was paranoid that they were putting acid in my IV because I was tripping. I was hostile and aggressive. I read the medical records, they kept me restrained for a couple of days after I hit a nurse. I started acting normal so they moved me from ICU to the sick bay. The blessing is forgetting 10 days of some pretty intense pain. I was broken in a lot of places and bruised in all the rest. Never knew you could bruise some of them. That freaked me out. The curse was I wasn't there when my wife needed me most. There is that tinge of guilt that she faced the grief alone for 10 days. I know, couldn't be helped. Not my fault, but live through it and tell me how it feels. Well, here are a couple of the less violent ones. One involved me having killed the mothers of 2 of my best friends. One male, one female. My female friend wasn't as upset as my male friend. In my delirium, he told everyone and at different times during the day, people would come into my hospital room and beat me with bags of sharp rocks. This happened a few times until my friend got a hold of me and he beat me until I was nothing more than blood and flesh on the floor. Even though I was sort of out of my body watching it happen, I was simultaneously in the moment being hit by the rocks. Days after coming home I had to be reassured I had not killed the mom of either friend. Another time I had visitors and my niece was holding my hand and massaging it, and I remember having a delusion that she was breaking all the bones in my hand. I could have sworn on a Bible at that time that it happened. So bizarre. There's so much worse that I can't/won't discuss because I am so ashamed that my mind even went to such dark places. I think I have PTSD from it all. It all seems so real. Ugh. I never want to go through that again.
This is Reddit Joe channel, and don't forget to hit subscribe down below for more upcoming videos.